Hi, this is Paul. A lot of the work of Jordan Peterson and what he sort of broke open, and this little corner is really, in many ways, a quest for a new foundation. As I've mentioned in previous videos, we're dealing with the continual, and I think Mark is right. It's not a perennial problem in as much as it's a perennial pattern of managing ongoing exploration of the world through divisions into dualisms and then collapsing into unified fields, theories, and monisms. And so dualism, monism. Sometimes you get out to three, but it's really hard to get beyond three because we have a difficult time tracking a lot of things because we tend to be fairly monofocal in terms of our awareness. So, in many ways, a lot of what the conversations focus on is the pursuit of so let's go back, the pursuit of a unified theory. What is beneath, what is behind. And if you look at least if you look at the history of the West, skepticism as to whether or not Rome and the church as an institution really had a handle on things obviously broke out in the Protestant Reformation. And the hope with Luther was that via texts, you could arrive at your unified theory, your unified foundation. And so for Luther, of course, sort of reason plus the text itself would deliver unity. And of course, the Protestant Reformation did not deliver unity. The Protestant Reformation delivered a plurality of institutions, and of course, those conversations are ongoing. And then, in the wake of the wars, because of the Protestant Revolution or the Protestant Reformation, you had the Enlightenment, which sought to sort of have a unified world based on, and even there they couldn't quite get it straight, empiricism and rationality, and that sort of leads to sort of a materialism versus an idealism. So there again you have the unity and dualities fighting each other, but the idea was, again, something universal. Reason, you look at Descartes, for example, reason is something that can't be questioned, and you try to have a foundation, and you build on that foundation. I think, therefore I am, and up from there. Or all of us have, in a sense, equal access to the empirical world, the material world. You have these more or less universal constants that we can study, and basically built on that, we can develop our world. And basically where we've been coming to in the 20th century and the 21st century is the end of that project, that in fact even the selection of things means that you can't arrive there. I played the video of the Dark Horse with Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying reading from Thomas Sowell. You have the problem of selection. And so sort of what lies beneath Vervaeke and Peterson and Peugeot is the agreement that the world is too complex to sort of fit in our heads. So selection has to be created. And if you go back to Jordan Peterson's first conversation with Sam Harris, where Peterson keeps trying to say there are a priori systems within us by which these selections take place. These are pre-conscious. They're not simply biological. They're also cultural. All of that comes together, and here we are. Jordan Peterson didn't get very far with Sam Harris. And so what tends to be developing are, in this little corner, we're looking for durable patterns and structures of data, maps of meaning in a sense. And these patterns are often found within religious texts, and they're found within nature, certainly, that can be empirically observed. But of course, you have, with the empirical world, you have the problem of data selection. And so what we're tending to look at is cultural and religious patterns that are as universal as possible for people. This is, some of the quest behind anthropology, some of the quest behind comparative religions, and I think in many ways that quest is sort of being merged with the scientific, obviously, especially through Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke, both of whom are scientists. Cognitive science itself is sort of a way to try to bring those two wholes together, again, seeking new foundations, seeking a unified theory. Now, in the culture war space, we see this played out in different ways. What is a woman? It would seemingly be the most obvious, easy, foundational thing to answer. And of course, you can go around the country asking really smart people with academic credentials and seats of power, and you ask them what a woman is, and they spitter and spin, and they can't really say an adult human female. And off you go, and you can make a rather amusing, powerful culture war tool on the basis of that little question. And of course, a lot of the culture war is disconnected from, I'd say, a lot of the disconnected, not really. A lot of the culture war is in many ways sort of the daily news cycle of this much deeper question underneath, and some of us who are a little less prone to get into the culture war issues do so because in some ways all of the drama and all of the stuff going on at this level can be a real distraction for reason, measured conversation, community, and so you try to have calm rooms and calm voices to address these sorts of things. One of the things that Tucker Carlson mentions in his Heritage Foundation talk is androgyny. And someone sent me a very interesting paper about that in terms of biblical studies. But one of the things that I came across is a video, and it's very much done sort of in the critical drinker video. But this guy, in some ways, is sort of mimicking critical drinker, but they go a little deeper. I've made mention before, of course, Justin Wells is using this. One of the things that I've noted with many of these videos is that if you use, and you might notice that I'm playing around with this in my sermon. I've actually played around this in my sermons for years. You go back to my my sermons in the aughts, my sermons from, let's see, 1999 through 2006, 2007, I used a lot of stills in movies and movie storytelling to work, partly because I noted that psychologically, especially blockbusters. Now, I think probably the movie theater was sort of the end of the mass media movie area, and so now we have streaming videos, and so we're sort of post blockbuster in a number of ways. And Jaws was, of course, the movie that sort of created the blockbuster, and so I'm using that in my sermons right now. But one of the areas that we're mining for this attempt at new foundations or unification are stories and patterns in storytelling. And Justin Wells, I haven't incorporated much of this into my videos yet, but I've been watching his videos very closely. I've really liked what Justin Wells has done with this, but I found a new channel that is doing similar things to Critical Drinker, but I think instead of just sort of getting lost in the froth of the culture war, this guy's going a little deeper. And one of the ways to try to evaluate and not be too distracted by all of the sort of screen illusions of people feeling like we know them or they're our friends, instead of them just being these screens of light in two dimensions that everybody sort of knows, is if you listen to the videos instead of watch them. Some of them you can do it more than others. With many of these videos, there's just certain scenes, famous scenes from many of these movies that sort of flash by quickly, and sometimes they're more to the point and less to the point. But I posted this little clip on Twitter. The whole video was well worth seeing, and in fact, I've been exploring the channel a little bit, and so let's get into some of that. The channel's name is Echo Chamberlain, has about 17,000 subscribers, so it's not a very big video, but he's been getting some very big views, like this video. It's, of course, when these videos tend to go viral, the algo, our friendly YouTube deity, sends it out to us, and that's how I caught attention to it, and I watched it, and Algo was right. This was a video that I would spend, now I've watched it through twice, at least 20 minutes, and I'll just play this clip, because this clip made the point about this clip made the point about the patterns that are giving us information about. Now, again, in the scientific period, we're very interested in predictive processing. These were the two P's that I couldn't remember when I was watching the Vervaeke video on artificial intelligence, on predictive processing. And he makes some very interesting observations about the way that movies are going. Shoot, I might just play the whole darn thing. And again, this is sort of in a critical drinker format, but I think he does it very well.
See femininity or sexuality as part of that empowerment. When Brie Larson's Captain Marvel wasn't saving the world, she was spending a lot of time with her hunky commanding officer, a cat-stroking secret agent, and a pointy-eared shapeshifter. But she kept things strictly platonic with all of them. Strange.
Now the name of the video is Hollywood's Sexless Modern Heroines, a video essay. And this is... He doesn't show his face on camera. At least I haven't found him in any of the videos that I've been watching. The accent, I suspect he's probably from Europe. What happens with YouTube is that when I do something like this will show up on their channel. If you use somebody else's video, you get basically a notification from YouTube, and that's how when I do this kind of thing, people who don't know about me, I'd be a little surprised if he maybe or maybe doesn't know. I mean, YouTube life in the kingdom of algo is interesting. I'll just say that. Let's keep going.
Strangely, many critics approved. Stylist magazine argued that the real superpower in Captain Marvel is female friendship, while Screen Rant put the absence of a love interest on its list of 5 things that Captain Marvel did better than Wonder Woman. Superheroes have far less romance in their lives than they used to. DC and Marvel joined Star Wars and Lord of the Rings in mass fantasy entertainment featuring heroines who were kind of aromantic and asexual.
Now again, if you'll notice as you watch through, like that scene of Brie Larson kind of looking bewildered, and this scene, these scenes just come up again and again and again and again in the video. It's almost a liturgy.
Consider the profoundly romantic and poignant exchanges when Aragorn falls in love with Arwen in The Lord of the Rings, and the challenges they face as their love grows richer throughout the saga.
Now I've been, I think I have the book on Kindle. I've also been reading a book on superheroes, which had a significant section on the creation of Wonder Woman. That's quite a story. That is by no means the sexless the sexless modern superheroes. The name of the book is Super Gods, Grant Morrison. Now, of course, with a title like that, I'm kind of a sucker. So Wonder Woman is the creation of William Moulton Marston, the man who not incidentally invented the controversial polygraph test apparatus. Well, that's interesting. Or lie detector that is still in use today. Marston was a professor at Columbia and Tufts University and Radcliffe College, and a good one. According to the accounts of the time, the author had several respected works of popular psychology. Like other forward thinkers, Marston saw in comics the potential to convey complex ideas in a form of exciting, violent, symbolic dramas. He described the great educational potential of the comics in an article entitled Don't Laugh at the Comics, which appeared in the popular women's magazine Family Circle in 1940 and led to his getting hired as an educational consultant at DC National. Marston coupled his ideas with an unorthodox lifestyle. His wife, Elizabeth, also a psychologist, is credited as having suggested a superheroine character. Both were enthusiastic proponents of a progressive attitude toward sex and relationships. They shared a mutual lover, a student of Marston's named Olive Byrne. So get the picture here. Here's a university professor and his wife that have a throuple with a student. Yeah, I guess, you could call that a progressive attitude. There might be some other words you could use. Said to be the physical model for the original Harry Peter drawing of Wonder Woman. Together, Marston and Peter, with indispensable input from Elizabeth and Olive, developed a fantasy world of staggering richness. For sheer invention, the relentless dedication to the core concept, the Wonder Woman strip far surpassed its competitors. But unlike traditional pinups, the girls of Wonder Woman were athletic and forceful. They wore tiaras and togas, and they were engaged in violent gladiatorial contests on the backs of giants, genetically engineered monster kangaroos. Wonder Woman was traditionally sexy. There were pinup shots, but in most panels she yomped and stomped like a martial arts majorette, outracing automobiles for fun. Some of you remember the Linda Carter, I certainly remember the Linda Carter Wonder Woman TV show. Linda Carter, not like the kind of women that's going to be portrayed in this video. 1941's Introducing Wonder Woman began when an Air Force plane crashed into an uncharted island inhabited exclusively by beautifully, scantily clad women capable of carrying the full-grown Air Force pilot as if he were a child. The captain, the first Wonder Woman movie had some of these things, but it didn't have it all. Captain Steve Trevor of the U.S. Army Intelligence and was the first to ever set foot on Paradise Island. Fantasy Island. The plane. And within moments, the Queen's daughter, Princess Diana, had fallen in love. A 2-page illustrated section revealed the history of Amazons since their slavery at the hands of Hercules. Encouraged by, now you can delve into universal history and the rest is history for talk about Amazons. Encouraged by their patron god Aphrodite, they liberated themselves and set sail for a magical island where they could establish a new civilization of women, far from the cruelty, greed, and violence that typified man's world. On Paradise Island, the immortal women set about fashioning their fabulous alternative to patriarchy, to a patriarchal heliocentric society. In the first issue, Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, consulted apparitions of Aphrodite and Athena, who clarified that Trevor had been sent deliberately by the gods, this time apparently for the Amazons to engage in seclusion and to join the worldwide struggle against Axis tyranny. You must send with them the strongest of your Wonder Women, for America, the last citadel of democracy and equal rights for women, needs your help. And so they go through this. It will get increasingly sexual and kinky, to say the least. The flip side of Amazon's essentially benign and formalized endeavor, a healthy sadomasochism, was the dungeon world of sadistic bondage, humiliation, and mind control that existed on the world beyond Paradise Island. In other words, they had healthy S&M instead of the unhealthy one that was run by men, apparently. They were crystallized in the form of Dr. Poison, a twisted dwarf in a rubber coat, wielding a dripping syringe. Poison hated women and loved to humiliate them. In a surprising twist, he was revealed to be mentally ill woman acting out her frustration. So, Dr. Evil was a trans man. The women of Paradise Island embodied an enticing blend of politically right-on and libidinous, As such, they were exemplars of a newfangled 20th century creed that was the same old bohemian free love with a new lexicon culled from the psychoanalytical theory and the pink and squeezy world of dreams and desires. Theirs was a kind of radical second wave separatist feminism where men were forbidden and things could only get better as a result. Indeed, in Marston's feminine paradise, happiness and security were in far greater supply than elsewhere in the superworld. In looking at other superhero comics, he had noted it seemed from a psychological angle that the comics' worst offense was their blood-curdling masculinity. A male hero at best lacks the quantities of maternal love and tenderness which are essential to the child as the breath of life. And so while Batman was a brooding orphan and the destruction of Superman's Krypton had robbed him of his birth parents, the magnificent scientists Jor-El and Laura Wonder Woman could ride her invisible plane down the rainbow runway to Paradise Island and check in with Mom anytime she wanted. Queen Hippolyta even had a magic mirror that allowed her to observe her daughter at any location on Earth. It was closed circuit television, or FaceTime by any other name. Hippolyta's magic mirror could only be a product of imaginary feminist superscience. So, when Marsden died of cancer in 1947, the erotic charge left the Wonder Woman strip and sales declined, never to recover. Without the originality and envy that Marston's obsession brought to the stories, Wonder Woman was an exotic bloom starved of rare nutrients. Once the lush, pervy undercurrents were purged, the character foundered. The island of Themyscira was scraped clean of any hint of impropriety, and all girl-chasing rituals ceased, along with reader commitments to the character. It wasn't long before Wonder Woman was coming across as an old maiden aunt, a disturbing cross between the Virgin Mary and Mary Tyler Moore. Some of you won't pick up that reference. But Elizabeth and Olive, her inspirations continued to live on. The unconventional, liberated Elizabeth was 100 years old when she died in 1993, the true Wonder Woman of this story. So keep that in mind when you continue to watch this video.
And
Galadriel,
consider the screen time allotted to the pair, to allow for the nuance of each sensual tendresse, the yearning and the conflict between affairs of the heart and affairs of state, between the spectre of the ravages of time itself. Think of the princess scoundrel flirtation in the original Star Wars trilogy, and the depiction of Padme in the prequel films, not only as an independent, assertive, and capable young woman, able in a firefight, but also as a maternal figure, looking forward to her role as a mother. Now compare that with the just good friends lame chastity of the recent trilogy. Looking closer, consider the recurring archetype, again and again and again, of strong, independent women for whom no intimate relationships exist or seem likely to exist.
Let's say domination of a certain kind of storytelling. And I'm seeing that something in the tradition that I am very familiar with is missing. It's not really there. And now I'm going to try to describe that thing that I think is missing. I played in my mind a couple of ways of trying to introduce this, and I think perhaps the simplest way is the Western. I studied Westerns for a while, about 10 or 15 years ago, and High Noon is kind of a classically structured Western. It's a 50s Western by a guy named Howard Hawks, and it's a very simple story. There's a sheriff. He is getting married to the pure girl from the East who arrives in town. She's a school teacher. He's going to get married to her, and he's going to give up his sheriff job because he's cleaned up the town and everything's hunky-dory, and he's going to ride off into the sunset with his new bride. And right at the beginning of the movie, the guy he put in jail 7 years ago or so has been unjustly let out of jail and is coming to town. He's going to recreate the bad world that the sheriff had cleaned up. And in the midst of it, he's going to kill the sheriff. His goal is revenge against the sheriff. And the story plays out, in somewhat complicated ways that aren't important to the point I'm trying to make. But of course, the wedding is off. He's now the sheriff again, and no one wants to help him. But the story builds to the point where there's the showdown. Of course, it's at high noon, and there's complications between him and the woman along the way. But in the end, right near the end of the movie, mano a mano in the street, sheriff kills the villain and rides up the school teacher, his bride. He throws down the sheriff's star, and they ride out of town. And that's the end of the movie. Now, that's the thing. The end of that is the thing that I think is missing and has kind of fallen off the map of storytelling recently. and I want to give that thing a little bit more flesh. It's what I want to call a generative arena. It's a circumstance in which the acting out of that world is building the future. It's possibility, and it's a kind of a stable place looking out into an open future. And of course, it's symbolized by a man and a woman and the potential for them to have children. And so that image would change the U-shaped journey of the hero, because it would put the end to be not really an end or the circle that Campbell has, but rather a destination. There would be a real destination there, maybe a plateau that is reached. And that's the goal. That's the telos of that story, of that narrative.
Right.
I'm going to start with James Bond.
Okay.
Because, you look at a standard James Bond flick, and it's got almost the exact structure, right?
Yep.
There's James Bond. He's an MI6. He's there flirting with what's her name, and he's a smart guy. He's a great fighter. He's all that. And the crisis. We've got a villain, and he charges out to fight the villain. Bad things happen. Obstacles. Alongside is this Bond girl. Oh, there she is, the Bond girl. She's there. She's with him. He's not gonna make it. He's trapped. The fates are against him. Whatever. Overcome the obstacles, destroy the villain, and there's he and the Bond girl in the love nest at the end of the film. And he's so involved in this, relationship that he doesn't even take the congratulations from MI6, as they call, or whatever. It's a classic ending, right? But James Bond is not a father, and the Bond girl is not a mother. That's not part of who they are. And I don't even, someone might say, well, maybe they'll go off again. But no, it's the structure of the narrative, the structure of the character is that they are not that person, in fact.
And shared that a number of times. You've picked it up before. And now notice where he's going to go with this.
Until recently, romance and sexuality has been essential to superheroes on the big screen. Michael Keaton-era Batman had Vicky Vale, and the almost dauntingly erotic Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. And the superhero genre can lay claim to at least 2 iconic romantic sequences.
Again, notice you watch this enough, it's almost a film loop of these certain scenes.
One is the Airborne Ballet, scored by John Williams, during which Superman flies Lois Lane over the sparkling city in Richard Donner's Superman. The other is the moment when a rain-drenched Mary Jane Watson peels back Spidey's...
And, he could have shown, I can see it in my mind, peels back to plant a big kiss on Spider-Man. I remember Christopher Reeves flying through. I'm not criticizing the video. This has become the genre.
Mask just enough to kiss him as he hangs upside down in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. But in recent years, superhero films have largely dispensed with sexuality, seduction, and romance. Love interests have been sidelined or written out altogether. One explanation may be that there is just no room for romance anymore.
Now it's possible that there's a lot of explanations. These movies are intended for multiple cultures, and different cultures have different sensitivities with respect to sexuality, but there are multiple ways that even with PG movies you can hint at things, and other cultures won't necessarily have anything about a look or a caress or a somehow a little montage and a baby appears, something like that. So the point still stands.
When you've got a convoluted, multi-film epic about 50 heroes foiling a genocidal alien giant, something has to hit the cutting room floor. But I think there are more dismal modern forces at work. The modern generation is, according to polling, the most sexually diverse there has ever been, with up to 20% identifying as LGBT, with further categories and permutations such as non-binary, gender fluid, and genderqueer. It might be logical to extrapolate from this and assume that the breaking down of constricting sexual and social conventions and expectations the corrosive consequences of societal and self-repression being dispelled, and the affirming nature of unabashed self-recognition would lead to more sexual openness and disinhibition.
Now, before he goes to the other point, it could also be that they want to stay away from it because the minute that Ray has a male love interest, or the minute now suddenly they're mapped on that rainbow of possibilities, and therefore you're going to exclude every other color in the rainbow. And you also sort of have your quota, which is pretty obvious in just about any movie today or any streamed series today, that you had better clearly drop in your whatever permutation in order to represent, so that everybody sees you're there to represent, which of course in Harry Potter, the movies which came out earlier, where are the gay characters? Where are the gay? Oh, Dumbledore is gay. Okay.
Strangely, though, the opposite has occurred, with the modern generation also being the most sexually dormant of the modern age. The antagonisms and neuroses of modern society, and the social constructivist view of gender that sees gender as a largely made-up and negative means of power relations, informed by negative gender roles and stereotypes, are all elements in this. And so, when that younger generation of writers bring certain attitudes and self-inserts and wish fulfillment and identity politics preoccupations into the writing room, you get the current circumstances.
There's another issue in this, too, in that part of the blessing of a gender binary is that you can sort of safely, especially with, let's say, the dominant paradigm up until not too many years ago, you've got a bunch of dudes hanging out. They're just a bunch of dudes. There's no sexual tension between the dudes, because even if there might be a person that's gay in that mix, they're probably going to keep it in the closet, and it's probably going to stay off screen, and it's probably not going to become an element of a 2-hour movie. Now, of course, with a book, you've got more room to go into characters and nuance, but for the most part, a movie, dudes will be dudes, and whether they're embracing or celebrating or whatever they're doing, you just don't have sex in the picture. But now with the absolute pluriformity of sexual options on the menu, there's sort of no space that's safe from sexuality or attraction or permutation or something. In other words, suddenly with the supernova of the rainbow of sexual and gender options, now suddenly there's no place that is safe from sex or sexual attractiveness or romance or anything like that. And so in many ways, about the only thing you can do is banish it entirely from the canvas.
Increasingly, female superhero characters are depicted as every bit as powerful as the men, or as not substantially dependent on a mentor, cannot be portrayed as being bested in a physical confrontation with a man, or be seen to be bested in an exchange of repartee, cannot have.
Okay, and that's one thing that, of course, Critical Drinker has talked about a lot. If there's a fight between a man and a woman, the woman always has to win. And the woman has to be shown as more skilled. And this has been true, when you watch things on the woman's, otherwise it's just a dude beating up a woman, and you can't have that. So, some people say, and I think there's a degree of truth to this, some people, they might have their reality calibrations thrown off by this, and they begin to imagine that, generally speaking, your average woman can stand up to your average man. And then when it happens, those who don't know too much very quickly discover. I've probably told this story before. I remember we were looking at maybe putting a security door on the front of the house so we could keep the door open and let air in, because that's the way the air breeze always comes through on a summer evening. And I made a comment to my wife about, vulnerability. And at that point, my oldest son was 13 years old. And she said, well, I can. And I said, well, let's do a little experiment. Let's put our 13-year-old son outside, and you open the door and see if our 13-year-old son can just push the door right in on you. My wife being not by no means a weak woman, but my then 13-year-old son already outweighed her and was playing sports in high school, and even at the age of 13, could pretty much, once the door was unlocked and open, could pretty much force his way through the door. And anybody who's had any real physical experience in the world knows that, case of myself and my wife, I outweigh her by 100 pounds and almost a foot. So just in terms of physical strength, not a fair fight. So that's been true. But then he goes into what I think has been I always say this word wrong. I should probably pause and learn how to say it correctly. A caricature against men has been that they are, sort of boiled down into mansplaining. They don't take guidance. They don't take mentorship. They don't take influence. They think they're always right, and they simply go straight ahead. Now, one of the amazing things about the Bible, and this actually comes up in one of the last Exodus series, is that the God of the Bible is open to our influence. He's not the unmoved mover of Aristotle. You see this throughout the Bible, where God hears the cries of Israel in Egypt. He's the God who sees when Hagar has fled into the desert and she thinks she's going to die. God shows up. God dialogues with Abraham. Am I going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah without talking to my friend Abraham? And they go back and forth over it. And so in the Hebrew world, even God is up for a conversation and open to influence and even colonization. But
have a process or be seen to be bested in an exchange of repartee, cannot have a process or approach explained to them in even a supportive or productive way, cannot undergo a character arc that sees them begin as fallible, even on the way to becoming self-sufficient and powerful.
In other words, these strong female characters are unmoved movers, and for that reason become really quite uninteresting, and really, for the most part, sort of to be avoided.
Approach explained to them in even a supportive or productive way, cannot undergo a character arc that sees them begin as fallible, even on the way to becoming self-sufficient and powerful, cannot be overly emotionally demonstrative in a way that would see them socially or professionally compromised, and their decisions cannot be overridden, or at least not without consequences. The key term in all of that is the idea of being compromised. For many modern writers,
now, right there, because they have to be. No, now we're dealing with ideals, right? They are the paragon. They are the epitome. They are the telos themselves embodied, and the stories become uninteresting. There's a long back in the day when I was listening to a lot of Peter Kreeft audio recordings that you can find floating around the internet. I mean, he made the point that, and I think following Chesterton, that part of the struggle that a lot of writers have in terms of writing good characters, which makes Lewis's Aslan quite remarkable, is that it's tremendously difficult because very often they simply become boring and the movie becomes utterly predictable because it's sort of the death of Superman, that they made a character that was just so above and beyond everything. You had increasing challenges to create dilemmas and actually gripping stories that you could somehow relate to the character.
The inclusion of a love interest, boyfriend or husband, for a female lead character can, at some latent level, compromise the ideal independence and exceptionalism of that character.
Now, this gets into the conversation with respect to Westerns because, again, if you look at John Wayne, The Searchers, Who Killed Liberty Valance, the good bad man who's going to have to do the damaging destruction so that habitable order can reemerge, they have to go off into the sunset. They're not going to, like in High Noon, go off with Grace Kelly and have very beautiful babies. And so what I think when you look at, say, what Dr. Jim notices about this, and you look at these story arcs, these are these characters, they just sort of are in the story, and in fact they harm the story and probably kill the story. And that's all the videos about the death of these fandoms and the death of these universes is basically attributable to how this goes. And now it's interesting again that, well, this is sort of, when we're looking at the opening question that we had of where's the PowerPoint? When we look at the opening question that we had of what is this about? Well, it's a terminal condition, and we're beginning to notice it.
It may imply the emotional parity and compromise inherent in any healthy relationship. It may imply a lessening of such a character's freedom, presence, and depiction as a force of nature if there are the commitments and ties of a relationship. And it may even imply the consequences of a furtherance and consummation of such relationships, such as child-rearing or domesticity, and limiting, compromising gender conventions. Oddly, you might think there would be the introduction of himbos, toy boys, subverted and exploited chads, or simps. But these writers have eschewed even this. The consequence is a kind of sterile, chaste empowerment.
And again, you can see in how many movies maybe you've got the hero, and he's buff and he's ready, and then you'll have sort of he's sleeping with prostitutes and he's sleeping with inconsequential women that aren't going to have any lines, and they're there just as sort of furniture. Well, you don't have that either, and obviously, even if, let's say, all of these strong female characters are lesbians, well, now suddenly you've introduced exactly what he says. Well, they have to be Aristotle's God.
Another element refers back to my first notion, that modern Hollywood is set on empowering women, but not femininity. Body types have gone from curvaceous, which many assumed was the thing modern feminism wished to promote.
Okay, so back to Wonder Woman, second wave feminism.
In the face of unrealistic body expectations, to instead favoring a female body type that is lacking in curves at all, and more approximates the physique of a 16-year-old boy. This is...
And again, I think in the editing of this video, he could have done a little bit more to illustrate some of these points during the video. And again, I think the analysis is terrific.
Aligned with the breaking down of any distinction between masculine and feminine physical fighting prowess and endurance. Do mainstream men or women want to see these types of physiques, or conflating of the genders into the same action archetype? Doesn't the success of the original Wonder Woman prove that unabashed appreciation of the female form, in its graceful and athletic movement, and the character's amorous interest in her co-lead, prove that cinema-goers of both genders like such depictions? The likes of Wonder Woman and Black Widow are becoming exceptions. The female form is increasingly being covered up in full-length bodysuits that reduce the breasts to window mannequin mounds and hips to less sheer curves, and which articulate little else. Perhaps with the intention of steering the viewer's gaze away from objectification and more towards the heroine's ability and persona, it also has a negating effect, diminishing the female aptitude for seduction, allure, charm, and the power also inherent with sensuality and beauty.
In other words, one of the key feminine powers is just simply off the table. And I would imagine part of why they're doing it is because they don't want that on the table. Again, for a number of the reasons that I've already mentioned.
The original Star Wars trilogy had Han and Leia working through feelings informed with competing notions of pride, desire, responsibility, all deferred by the powerful forces turning about them. There is sensual and sexual tension between them, Leia puncturing Han's male ego and presumption, and Han teasingly puncturing her royal lineage and trappings.
One of the things that I would think a fair number of women like movies with romance. So again, back to these stereotypes that are not at all unfounded. Men are visually engaged and women are romantically engaged. And so if the women don't look appealing to men, viewership goes down. If there's no romantic tension in the movie, viewership from women will go down. And so what I think this really gets to, again, is the idea that, well, maybe we're learning something that in some ways is difficult to unlearn. And you can't sort of sideline it and say, well, this is sort of a religious sectarian or a confessional Protestant, that in fact the proof is in the outcome. And when you see that these storytelling arcs with the constraints that they have lead to dead ends, you begin to notice that, well, some of the older ones went a lot further. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot has been, there's a lot of videos of sort of the critical drinker, this kind of video out there that is basically saying, well, we're watching the death of these sequences now, and storytelling varieties. Now, that's not at all unusual. Things rise and fall, but in our saturated hyperculture, they seem to go through their cycles incredibly quickly. And, one of the things that's going to be interesting to see now that HBO seems to think it wants to try its hand at redoing Harry Potter, it'll be very interesting, because when you redo it in such rapid succession from the first round, everybody is going to compare and contrast. I mean, we've even had this with, of course, the Amazon's attempts at Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, and so I think this video was really outstanding, and I've watched a few of his other videos, and I hope to see a few more, and well, we'll see. So anyway, let me know what you think. Leave a comment.